As for churches, the thing that is surprising to me today is that over the past 10 years, something like 20 historic Harlem churches have either been destroyed or greatly altered. And I never dreamed that African Americans who placed so much importance on the Black church would allow these buildings, which are so representative of all of our hope and aspirations and history, to be so casually destroyed. And yet that is what is happening at this very minute. Developers and property owners in New York City are eager to turn all of New York into the same 3 neighborhoods with the same 3 stores selling to the same 2 people. And what will be the significance or the meaning or the value of the Schomburg or the Studio Museum or the National Black Theater or the Apollo Theater once Harlem is a neighborhood like every other neighborhood in Manhattan and is mostly all white?
It is not as if one day you get a letter in the mail that says, we are now gentrifying your neighborhood and things are about to change dramatically. That does not happen. They just come in and they start making many, many changes, and you watch. I enjoyed growing up in Harlem. Harlem has some of the most beautiful architecture in New York City. We lived 1 block from Riverside Drive, which is a gorgeous park, and we'd often go there. I played on the street as a kid. It wasn't really until the dramatic heroin epidemic that took over Harlem, and then the crack craze occurred. So it became challenging, in certain areas to even walk around.
Sugar Hill was an area in Harlem where many of the quote-unquote elite lived, and it was just a sweet place to live. You had a lot of celebrities. Sometimes those things get erased and lost and pushed to the side so people forget the roots.
It was the sweetness of the culture that was up on that hill. That was a very artistic community. You had artists, actors. In my block, as a matter of fact, they told me Butterfly McQueen grew up in that block. And currently we have artists like J.E. Franklin, who's an artist as well as a director. And the area now is a little different.
So I never saw one day, I just saw it coming gradually over the years as you began to see more white folks, more folks from Asia and other communities. But to me, it wasn't in any one day, it was just an evolution over the last, say, 20 plus years.
Eventually, it became quite apparent that things were changing in Harlem for good. One of the signs was when they began to offer money to different people in my building to move out. They would offer them another apartment somewhere else in the city, and many people moved out. Some people moved out of New York City altogether. As each year went by, the amount that they were offering went higher and higher and higher, because they knew that they would make that money back 100 times over.
More and more, prices will increase, and there will be fewer and fewer Black people who live here. That would kill New York being New York, and by the same token, Harlem being Harlem, a place that's so unique and extraordinary.
New York City has more cultural parades than any other state in America. Here in Harlem, we have the Africa Day Parade, the African American Day Parade, the Malcolm X Day Parade, and the Marcus Garvey Day Parade. All of these parades, collectively and separately, are vital to the culture of Harlem.
The history of it having been the African American cultural capital for 100 years won't matter. So that's the downside. I mean, that you can't live here and that people who come after you, like you, won't be able to live here.
The most challenging is usually the economics and the housing, really. People of color losing property to people other than their relatives. In other words, the passing down of property tradition has been severely broken, and thus a great loss of ownership of property in Harlem, and continuing.
Kids in my building have gone off to college, gone to prestigious universities, got degrees, and can't afford to rent apartments in the building they grew up in.
Insightful enough that we worried if that magical day happened when Harlem experienced this new renaissance, would Black people still be able to afford to live here? And it was a good thing that we thought that way, because that is, of course, exactly what happened, but it was almost imperceptible. So, when I came here in '85, you could still buy a pretty nice house, the entire house, for like, say, $80,000. And it was not until 1987, just before the financial downturn in '87, that for the first time a house in Harlem sold for over $500,000. And then, of course, the economic downturn happened and the prices stayed flat. But gradually, little by little, they began to rise. And lo and behold, in the year 2000, for the first time, the first house in Harlem sold for $1 million.
Growing up in Harlem in the late 60s and 70s was very exciting because of all the activity and the diversity there in the many neighborhoods. My neighborhood was a mixture of Irish, Puerto Rican, Filipino, Greek, German, and Jewish people, and they were quickly moving out of the area. Urban flight, I think they call it. Now, from time to time, my father had errands to run that would take him to the east side of Harlem, or what we knew as El Barrio, or Spanish Harlem, and he would always bring us along. But the smell of the area always seemed of cooking food, good food. And for us kids, heading to El Barrio had the excitement of going to another country, or like going to an amusement park. As we approached La Marqueta, the smell would hit us before we entered the place. It was a combination of smells like fresh fish, livestock, exotic produce, and spices, all into one. We were used to seeing prepackaged food in supermarkets, but not at La Marqueta. It was an adventure through the cultures of our Caribbean heritage that I will never forget. And that, unfortunately, most young urban kids nowadays will never experience, especially growing up in Harlem.
all of the marginalized groups in America, there's been this effort, which is going on again today, to erase us from history, to pretend as if we didn't exist, and certainly to pretend as if anything bad that happened to us in the past or anything bad that's happening to us now, as if it doesn't exist. And that any difficulties or problems we have are all of our own making. And that's just ridiculous.
Gentrification, to me, as a Black person, always meant white people are coming to take over. That was a threat. Oh, they're gentrifying. You don't want to be part of gentrification. What are you doing to keep the white people out? What are you doing to keep what we own? Excuse me, you don't you, again, purport that another race, another person is taking over. Of course it makes you scary. And again, that's when the realities of slavery come back in. Because gentrification to me means here's somebody coming to take over what you have and usurp your authorities, your respect, and your cultures. But that is not to say whatever people see the broadest definition of gentrification for me is change. People talk about the new Harlem and the old Harlem. It's Harlem then and now.